Relax your heart. Calm your mind. Breathe deeply. Right now, God is working. Even if you cannot feel it, even if you cannot see it, even if nothing around you seems to be changing. Many people think God works loudly, with signs, with sudden breakthroughs, with visible miracles. But very often, His greatest work happens quietly, silently, invisibly. While you are sleeping, He is arranging. While you are waiting, He is preparing. While you feel stuck, heaven is moving. You must understand this truth deeply. Silence is not delay, and silence is not denial. Silence is often God's workshop. Just as a seed grows silently under the soil, God's plan for your life is developing beneath the surface. If you dig up too early with worry, fear, or impatience, you may interrupt what God is forming. When you relax and trust, you are not being passive. You are being faithful. Faith is not forcing things to happen. Faith is resting in the assurance that God knows exactly what He is doing. The moment you stop struggling and say, "Lord, I trust you," something powerful happens in the spiritual realm. God begins to work on your behalf without resistance. Many blessings are lost not because God is unwilling, but because people refuse to rest. Anxiety says, "I must fix this." Faith says, "God is fixing this." Worry speaks fear into the future, but trust speaks confidence into God's promises. When your heart is at peace, you align yourself with divine timing. There are doors you cannot open by effort, but they will open effortlessly when the appointed time comes. God is connecting people, shifting circumstances, removing obstacles, and preparing answers, all while you think nothing is happening. Heaven is never idle. So do not rush. Do not panic. Do not compare your journey with others. Your time is coming. What God has planned for you cannot be stopped, delayed, or taken by another person. If God promised it, He will perform it. Tonight, lay your burdens down. Let go of control. Trust the process. Trust the timing. Trust the silence. Because even now, God is working out for you. And when His work is complete, it will be more beautiful than anything you imagined. Many people expect God to work in ways that are loud, obvious, and immediate. They look for sudden changes, dramatic signs, and visible breakthroughs. When none of these appear, they begin to doubt, fear, or assume that nothing is happening. But the truth is, God often chooses silence as His greatest method of work. When everything around you feels quiet, when prayers seem unanswered, and when there is no clear movement, that is often a moment when God is doing His deepest and most precise work in your life. Silence is not God stepping away from you. Silence is God leaning in, carefully shaping outcomes that cannot be rushed. Just as the most important processes in life happen quietly, the growth of a child in the womb, the forming of roots beneath the soil, the healing of a body, God's work in the spiritual realm does not require noise to be effective. His power does not depend on visibility. He does not need to announce what He is doing before He does it. When God is silent, He is protecting you from interference. If you knew every detail of what He was arranging, fear might overwhelm you or pride might rise within you. Silence keeps you dependent on trust rather than control. It teaches you to walk by faith and not by sight. In the quiet, God strengthens your inner life, deepens your faith, and prepares your character for what is coming next. Many people give up too early because they mistake silence for delay or rejection. But often, silence is a sign that God is working on things beyond your reach. He is dealing with people, timing, and circumstances you cannot influence. He is closing doors that will harm you and opening paths that will bless you. While you are wondering why nothing has changed, heaven is aligning everything perfectly. There are seasons when God speaks, and there are seasons when He works. When He speaks, He gives direction. When He is silent, He is building results. If God spoke constantly, you might rely more on His words than on His presence. Silence draws you closer, not farther. It invites you to trust His heart, even when you cannot hear His voice. So do not fear the quiet seasons. Do not rush God with impatience or disturb His work with worry. Learn to rest in the silence, because it is in those moments that God is doing something far greater than you can see, something far deeper than you can feel, and something far more powerful than you can imagine. Trust grows when you stop striving and start resting. Many people believe that faith means constant effort, endless praying with anxiety, and pushing themselves to make things happen. They confuse spiritual activity with spiritual maturity. But true trust is not proven by how hard you struggle. It is revealed by how well you rest in God. Striving says, I must make this work. Resting says, God is already at work. The moment you stop forcing outcomes and surrender control, your faith begins to deepen in ways effort never could. Striving often comes from fear, the fear of loss, failure, or delay. It keeps the heart restless and the mind exhausted. You may still believe in God, but you secretly believe the result depends on you. Rest, on the other hand, is a declaration of confidence. When you rest, you're saying without words that God is trustworthy, capable, and faithful. Rest does not mean doing nothing. It means refusing to panic while God is doing everything. God never asked you to carry burdens He already promised to handle. When you strive, you place pressure on your soul that was never meant to be there. But when you rest, you make room for peace, and peace sharpens your spiritual vision. In rest, you begin to sense God's presence more clearly. You hear His guidance more gently. You stop reacting emotionally and start responding spiritually. Resting requires humility. It means admitting that your strength is limited and your understanding incomplete. Many answers are delayed not because God is unwilling, but because striving keeps the heart tense and closed. God works best in a surrendered heart. When you relax your grip, God tightens His hold. When you step back, God steps forward. Faith matures in stillness. Just as calm water reflects clearly, a rested heart reflects God's will more accurately. When you are constantly striving, you miss divine direction because your soul is too noisy. Rest quiets the inner storm and allows trust to take root. Over time, that trust becomes unshakable, not because circumstances improve, but because your confidence in God did. Rest also protects you from burnout. God never intended faith to exhaust you. He intended it to sustain you. When you rest, you acknowledge that God's timing is perfect and His methods are wise. You stop measuring progress by speed and start measuring it by alignment. So let go of the pressure to force results. Release the need to understand everything. Choose rest over resistance, peace over panic, and trust over striving, because it is in resting that faith grows strong and God's work becomes beautifully complete. Waiting seasons often feel like the hardest parts of life because nothing seems to move and progress feels invisible. Many people assume that when they are waiting, they are falling behind or being ignored by God. But waiting is not wasted time. It is a sacred season where God is preparing you for what you have prayed for. If God gave you the blessing before the waiting did its work, the blessing might overwhelm you instead of helping you. In the waiting, God is not punishing you. He is preparing you. He is shaping your character, strengthening your faith, and teaching you dependence. Waiting removes impatience and replaces it with endurance. It teaches you how to trust God's timing rather than demanding your own. What feels like delay is often divine protection, because God sees outcomes you cannot see and dangers you do not yet understand. Waiting also reveals what is truly in your heart. When answers are slow, motives are purified, desires become clearer. You begin to distinguish between what you want and what you truly need. In these quiet stretches, God aligns your desires with His will so that when the blessing comes, it does not pull you away from Him, but draws you closer. Many important things cannot be rushed. Fruit must ripen. Foundations must settle. Strength must be built. God uses waiting to establish stability so that what He gives you will last. A life built too quickly often collapses just as fast. Waiting creates roots that go deep enough to sustain future growth. During the waiting season, God is also working beyond you. He is arranging circumstances, preparing people, opening paths, and closing doors that would harm you later. You may feel still, but heaven is active. Every delay has a purpose, and every moment of waiting is filled with unseen progress. Waiting teaches you how to live by faith rather than feelings. Feelings change daily, but faith stands firm. When you continue to trust without immediate results, your faith becomes resilient. You learn that God's faithfulness is not proven only by quick answers, but by a steady presence through the wait. So do not despise the waiting season. Do not rush ahead of God or give up in frustration. Embrace the waiting as preparation, because when the time is right, what God releases will be greater, stronger, and more enduring than anything you could have achieved on your own. Faith is not rooted in what you see. It is anchored in what you believe before you see anything change. Many people say they have faith, but their confidence only appears after circumstances improve. True faith begins earlier. It begins when there is no evidence, no confirmation, and no visible progress. It is trusting God's promise while everything around you suggests the opposite. Believing before seeing requires surrender of logic and control. Human nature wants proof first and trust later, but faith reverses that order. Faith says that God's word is more reliable than present reality. When you choose to believe ahead of evidence, you are aligning yourself with the spiritual realm rather than the physical one. What is formed in the spirit eventually manifests in the natural, but it always starts unseen. This kind of faith trains your heart to rely on God's character instead of circumstances. Situations change, people change, emotions fluctuate, but God remains constant. When there is no evidence, faith holds on to who God is rather than what he does. It declares that even if the outcome is not yet visible, God is still faithful, still powerful, and still in control. Believing before seeing also protects you from fear. Fear demands immediate results, but faith is patient. Fear reacts to delays as threats, but faith recognizes delays as part of a larger plan. When you believe without evidence, you are saying that God's timing is wiser than your urgency. That kind of trust brings peace even in uncertainty. Many breakthroughs are preceded by a period where faith is tested in complete silence. God often allows this space so that faith can mature. If answers came too quickly, belief would remain shallow. When you continue to trust without signs, your faith becomes deep, resilient, and unshakable. It no longer depends on outcomes to survive. Faith spoken before evidence carries power. Words shaped by faith shape your perspective, your attitude, and your endurance. When you confess trust while nothing has changed, you reinforce your alignment with God's promises. Over time, faith transforms the way you wait, the way you endure, and the way you hope. So choose to believe even when you cannot see. Choose trust over proof and confidence over clarity. What you believe now is preparing the ground for what you will see later, because faith that stands before evidence creates room for God to move in ways that surpass human understanding. Even when nothing appears to be happening, God is actively arranging things behind the scenes. Human eyes measure progress by visible movement, but God works in dimensions that cannot be observed. While you're focused on what is missing, God is positioning people, aligning timing, and orchestrating details that must come together perfectly. What looks like stillness to you is often a season of intense divine activity. God's behind-the-scenes work protects you from premature outcomes. If everything unfolded at once, you might step into situations unprepared or face responsibilities you are not yet ready to carry. God arranges events in an order that builds stability rather than pressure. Each unseen adjustment is purposeful, ensuring that when things finally shift, they shift in your favor and with lasting impact. There are conversations God is influencing, doors he is quietly closing, and opportunities he prepared without your involvement. You may not be invited into every process, but that does not mean you are excluded from the result. God does not require your awareness to work on your behalf. He requires your trust. When you trust him, you allow him the freedom to move without interference. Behind the scenes, God is also protecting you from what you cannot see. Some delays exist because God is removing obstacles that would later cause harm. He may be separating you from relationships, paths, or decisions that look appealing now, but would limit your future. What feels like loss in the present may be divine prevention. God also uses hidden seasons to align your inner life with your outward blessing. He knows that external success without internal readiness leads to collapse. While you wait, God is strengthening your patience, sharpening your discernment, and grounding your faith. When the visible change arrives, you will be able to sustain it with wisdom and humility. Nothing God does is random. Every detail matters, and every moment has meaning. Even when you feel forgotten, you are not overlooked. God's silence does not indicate absence. It indicates strategy. He sees the full picture, while you only see a single moment. So remain steady and confident. Do not judge God's work by what you can see today. Trust that behind the scenes, everything is being arranged with care, precision, and love, and when the moment is right, what has been quietly prepared will be revealed in a way that confirms God's perfect plan for your life. Peace is not just a feeling you experience after problems are solved. It is a spiritual condition that allows God's power to operate freely in your life. Many people believe they must wait for circumstances to change before they can have peace, but God invites you to receive peace first. When your heart is calm and your mind is settled, you create an atmosphere where God can move without resistance. Peace is not weakness. It is strength under control. When the heart is filled with anxiety, fear, and constant worry, it becomes noisy inside. That inner noise makes it difficult to discern God's guidance and difficult to trust His timing. Anxiety pushes you to act prematurely, speak carelessly, and make decisions rooted in fear rather than faith. Peace, however, slows you down and anchors you. It allows you to respond instead of react, to wait instead of rush, and to trust instead of panic. God's power flows most freely where there is surrender. Peace is a sign of surrender. It says, God, I trust you with what I cannot control. The moment you release the need to manage every detail, you open the door for God to intervene in ways you never could. Peace removes the pressure you place on yourself and hands the responsibility back to God, where it belongs. Many miracles are delayed not because God is unwilling, but because hearts are restless. A restless heart tries to assist God, correct God, or hurry God. Peace steps aside and allows God to work according to His wisdom. When you maintain peace in the middle of uncertainty, you are declaring that God's power is greater than the problem you face. Peace also protects your faith. Trials can shake emotions, but peace stabilizes the soul. It keeps you grounded when circumstances fluctuate. With peace, you are not easily discouraged by delays or intimidated by opposition. You remain confident that God is still in control, even when outcomes are unclear. Choosing peace is an act of faith. It is deciding to trust God's promises over your fears and His timing over your urgency. Peace aligns your heart with heaven's rhythm. When your heart is aligned, God's power is released in ways that bring lasting transformation rather than temporary relief. So guard your peace diligently. Refuse to let worry dominate your thoughts or fear rule your decisions. Let peace lead your heart, because where peace reigns, faith stands firm, trust grows strong, and God's power is activated to work mightily on your behalf. Silence does not mean that God has left you or forgotten you. Many people interpret silence as absence, assuming that if God is not speaking or responding in obvious ways, He must be distant. But God's silence is very different from human silence. When people are silent, it often means disinterest or avoidance. When God is silent, it often means closeness, focus, and intentional work. He is present even when He is quiet. God's presence is not proven by constant signs or continual reassurance. His presence is steady, faithful, and unchanging. Silence invites you to trust who God is rather than what you hear from Him. If God spoke at every moment, faith would never mature. Silence strengthens faith because it teaches you to rely on God's character instead of depending on constant confirmation. In quiet seasons, God is often drawing you closer to Him in a deeper way. When words are removed, relationship grows through trust. Just as close relationships do not require nonstop conversation to remain strong, your relationship with God does not weaken because of silence. In fact, silence often deepens intimacy. You learn to rest in His presence without needing explanations or answers. Silence also refines your spiritual sensitivity. When external noise fades, your inner awareness increases. You begin to notice subtle guidance, gentle convictions, and quiet assurance that you might have missed before. God trains your heart to listen beyond words, to recognize His peace, His restraint, and His timing. Silence teaches you discernment. Many people walk away too soon because they assume silence means rejection. But God is often silent when He is preparing something too important to rush. He knows when speaking would distract you or overwhelm you. Silence protects the process. It keeps you from leaning on information instead of faith and prevents you from acting before the right time. God's silence also builds endurance. It teaches you how to remain faithful without emotional reinforcement. When you continue to trust, pray, and obey during silence, your faith becomes stable and resilient. It is no longer dependent on feelings or circumstances. It becomes rooted, mature, and strong. So do not fear the quiet moments with God. Do not interpret silence as distance or absence. Learn to rest in the assurance that God is near, attentive, and actively involved, even when He is quiet, because His silence is often the evidence that He is working deeply, carefully, and lovingly in ways that will soon bring clarity and purpose to your life.